Burnt Toast!
Hello and welcome to the Burnt Toast Show. I'm your host, Todd Harold. Hope you're all doing well. This is episode 9, and I'm very happy to be here talking to you tonight. We have a very special guest tonight, Scott Sherrard. I did an interview with Scott Sherrard. We did have some issues with the Zoom, we just have a picture of Scott Sherrard. I would have liked to have done it the same way that we always did, but somehow there was a glitch in Zoom, and the electronics are a complicated thing. The internet is a complicated thing, but we do have a really great interview, and I hope that you'll check it out. I do want to say before we start in on anything else that, as always, our sponsor for tonight is Premier Chiropractic, Dr. John McDonald, an affordable walk-in clinic that I would recommend very highly. Dr. John always takes care of me, and I know that he'll take care of you. Let's play. We got a lot of new music there now, a lot of unusual music, I think, in that playlist, and it's going to be right here, right? And that's where they put the playlist. The last thing we heard was Okonski, a trio, but this is not a trio. They added somebody else, but a trio led by the pianist Steve Okonski. That was a track called Easy that was just released on February 26th, so it's less than a week old right now as I'm taping. But Steve Okonski on the piano, Aaron Fraser on the drums, Michael Montgomery on the bass, and Terry Cole on the organ. Okonski on the Coal Mine record label, still doing some great stuff. Before that, we heard a radio ad for Funkadelic. The album is called Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow. They don't actually say the word ass in the radio ad. This was from July of 1970. I would imagine that you couldn't say ass on the radio in 1970. Maybe you still can't. I don't know. Before that, we heard the Fearless Flyers from their album called The Fearless Flyers 3 that was released in March of 2022. They're an offshoot of the band Wolfpack, and we heard their version of the Steely Dan classic Reelin' in the Years. A little different version there. Corey Wong on the guitar, Joe Dart on the bass, Nate Smith on the drums, and Mark Lettieri on the baritone guitar. Corey Wong and Joe Dart, I believe, are still full-time members of Wolfpack, and this is, as I said, a little offshoot that's become very popular. That's Reelin' in the Years by the Fearless Flyers. Before that, we heard the actual Steely Dan from their album from February of 1974 called Pretzel Logic. Night by Night, the name of the song. This was sort of a transitional album for them. Their first two albums, Can't Buy a Thrill and Countdown to Ecstasy, featured the full band, occasionally augmented by a session player or two. And this got to be kind of an even kind of, there's a lot of session players and a lot of band. So it's hard to tell who's on this. There was just a big list. But this was the last album that they did with a band. I don't know exactly who's on this, but I can tell you that Donald Fagen is doing the vocals. The song was written by Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, as always. Donald Fagen doing the vocals. I assume he's on some keyboards. Jeff Skunk Baxter on the lead guitar and the solo, who has had a very interesting career. He's in some governmental work now. Didn't see that coming. Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan, governmental work. Anyway, Jeff Porcaro on the drums. He was, I think, 19 at that time. Played on 2 tracks on this album. He was their tour drummer. Later went on to play with everyone in the 1970s and 80s and formed the band Toto. And Chuck Rainey on the bass, who played on so many of their great songs. Chuck Rainey, great bass player based out of New York. Before Steely Dan, we heard Nigel Hall from an album called Spiritual from 2021. And that was a track called People in Search of a Life. People in Search of a Life was originally done by a singer named Mark Dorsey, written by Mark Dorsey as well. And it was originally from the Spike Lee film called The Clockers. This version, Nigel Hall, who we know from Lettuce, great New Orleans-based musician, keyboard player and vocalist with Lettuce. He plays keyboards and does vocals on this. And he's backed up by Butcher Brown, the great band Butcher Brown, Corey Fonville on the drums, DJ Harrison on the keyboards, Andrew Randazzo on the bass, and Morgan Burrs on the guitar on this song. Before that, we heard one of my all-time favorites, Michelle Ndegeocello, who I've been digging deep into lately. And this was from a compilation, a benefit compilation for AIDS awareness that came out in 1994 after her first album, Plantation Lullabies, was put out. And it was an album called Stolen Moments, Red Hot and Cool. This was a track called Nocturnal Sunshine, features Herbie Hancock as the special guest on piano. I'm guessing it's her regular band. It sounds like a regular band, so that would be Michelle Indeguicello on the vocals, the bass, and the keyboards, Herbie Hancock on the featured acoustic piano, Gene Lake on the drums, Alan Cato on the guitar, Federico Gonzalez Pena on the keyboards, and Daniel Sadownik on the percussion. Now, that's speculation. It doesn't say anywhere on the album, but I'm trying to pick it out from knowing what I know these guys sound like. And I think I'm right. That's Gene Lake. That's Gene Lake. But anyway, Michelle Indeguicello. If you haven't checked out a lot of Michelle Indeguicello, what a great career she's had. Tremendous career and tremendous bass player. I don't think she gets enough credit for her bass playing. Before that, we heard Daryl Hall and John Oates from an album called Bigger Than Both of Us. That was a huge hit for them. It was their 5th LP. They had a #1 hit for the first time in their careers with a song called Rich Girl. This came out in August of 1976. We did not play Rich Girl. We played Do What You Want, Be What You Are, one of the great Daryl Hall and John Oates songs. They wrote that together. They did something together at one point. Daryl Hall on the lead vocals and keyboards, also background vocals. John Oates on the background vocals and guitar. Christopher Bond, who was really important to a few albums, the Abandoned Luncheonette album, the Silver album, just called Daryl Hall and John Oates, and this album in particular. He was all over those albums, playing lead guitar and keyboards. I think he was a bit of an arranger for them as well. I'm not sure if he ever toured with them. But Leland Sklar on the bass and Jim Gordon on the drums. Jim Gordon, there's a great book about Jim Gordon called Drums and Demons. And this may well be the song, I think this is the song, where he was at a Daryl Hall, and just to preface this a little bit, Jim Gordon suffered from schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, and eventually it really took him down. That book turns very dark, and it's pretty well publicized and well known that he really lost it. But he's on everything in the 1960s and 70s. He's on God Only Knows by the Beach Boys. He's on Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell. He's on Low Spark of High Heel Boys by Traffic. He's on You're So Vain by Carly Simon. He's on Midnight at the Oasis by Maria Muldaur. He's on the entire Derek and the Dominoes, Layla and Other Love Songs album. He's Ricky Don't Lose That Number. He's on Pretzel Logic. He's the drummer on everything except for Night by Night on that album. So he was everywhere. And then he got very involved with drugs and alcohol, and that really exacerbated the schizophrenia. And this, I believe, was the session where they had to stop because Jim Gordon had a very loud argument with someone who wasn't in the room. And that's when everybody sort of knew that Jim wasn't coming back. But anyway, what a great sounding track. And a great track by Jim Gordon, actually, too. Great drumming on this. Daryl Hall and John Oates, Do What You Want, Be What You Are, from Bigger Than Both of Us. Albert Collins before that, the master of the Telecaster, the Iceman. His group was called Albert Collins and the Icebreakers. He was based out of Texas. This was from an album called Truckin' with Albert Collins from 1969. It was a track called Frosty, but it was originally recorded in 1964 and then released on an album called The Cool Sounds of Albert Collins. It was recorded in 1964, as I said, in Beaumont, Texas, the home of Johnny and Edgar Winter. And of course, he was using a Telecaster on that. I can't find anything on any personnel on that.
We can't give out no information.
But that's called Frosty, and it was really the track that put Albert Collins on the map. Now, the myth is, and I couldn't find anything to verify this, but I've been told before that the myth is that Albert Collins didn't let go of his day job, which I think was in insurance, until well into his career. I guess it sort of correlates with Tom Scholes from Boston, who didn't let go of his job at Kodak until well after the Boston first LP had sold like 7 million copies. Then he felt like it was okay to quit his day job. Same with Albert Collins. Didn't really feel secure with this blues thing. Before that, we heard the Tedeschi Trucks Band with Something Brand New, an album called an album called Future Soul that's going to be released on the 20th of March. And on the cover, they're pictured as superheroes. This is a track called Who I Am. I guess they've picked up with a major management company, Irving Azoff, who made his name managing the Eagles in the 1970s, and they're going to be opening for the Eagles in some of their farewell tour dates this year. It'd be great to see if that actually happens. That's cool, but there's also this voice in the back of my head. Maybe you remember Pulp Fiction, where Ving Rhames is talking to Bruce Willis, and he says, if you were going to make it, you'd have made it by now. And I think that the Tedeschi Trucks Band have kind of established who they are and what they do, and they're really, really great. And I'm not sure what's going on here, but more power to them. Hope you make a lot of bucks and keep the band together forever. This song, Who I Am, Susan Tedeschi on the lead vocals and guitar, Derek Trucks on the lead and slide guitar, Gabe Dixon on the keyboards, Brandon Boone on the bass, Tyler Greenwell and Isaac Eady on the drums, Kebby Williams, Elizabeth Leah, and Emmanuel Elcom on the horns. That's a new member. I don't know how to pronounce his name yet. Sorry about that. But I don't know if the other members of the band are also superheroes or if it's just Derek and Susan. But, you know, they take off their shirts and they've got the D and the S. Yeah. Wonder whose idea that was. But anyway, before that we heard Mofro, before they were called J.J. Grey and Mofro, from their debut album called Blackwater from 2001. That was a track called Lazy Faux Acre. That was produced by Dan Prothero, who had a very specific sound as a producer. It was really cool. He did a Galactic album, at least one Galactic album as well. J.J. Grey there on the vocals and the guitar, Daryl Hance on the lead guitar, Fabrice Quentin on the bass, George Sluppick on the drums, and Robert Walter, special guest on the keyboard. We'll talk more about Robert Walter. Before Mofro, Soul Live from a brand new album, their first in 15 years. The album is called Flowers. That was a track called Vines. It was recorded in Iceland at Floki Studios. I'm not sure why they did that, but maybe I'll get to talk to one of them. Maybe I'll do an interview with one of those guys if I'm fortunate. I've talked to Alan Evans, the drummer, before on the show when I was on the radio. And I would love to talk to Eric Krasno, too. So we'll see if that ever happens. But we can find out why they recorded in Iceland. It's cool that they did. But this was a track called Vines. Neil Evans on the organ, Alan Evans, his brother, on the drums, and Eric Krasno on the guitar. We started off tonight with a brand new band called The Breaks from an album that's self-titled album, The Breaks, that's coming out in May. It'll be out May 1st on Color Red Records, based out of Colorado. Robert Walter on the organ. We played a track called Hashish, and that was Robert Walter on the organ. We know him from the Grey Boy All-Stars, from the Mofro thing that we played later in the set, and he's the keyboard player with Roger Waters when Roger Waters tours. Stanton Moore on the drums. He's the drummer with Galactic. He also has his own group and is part owner of Tipitina's in New Orleans. And Eddie Roberts from the new Master Sounds on guitar. Eddie Roberts is actually also the CEO, I guess you could say, of Color Red Records. And it's always good when you have a band member who actually owns the record company. Your record will come out. It's a cool thing. So there you go. Once again, brought to you by, this is the Burnt Toast Show, brought to you by Premier Chiropractic, 7113 West Jefferson Boulevard. Dr. John McDonald. Dr. John, going to take care of you. We're heading into the second set, and then after that, we've got an interview with Scott Sherrard from Little Feat. I thought it was a great talk. I wanted to talk to Scott Sherrard. I mean, basically, this is a collection of people that I really, really wanted to talk to for a long time, get their take on things. And sometimes it's very different. Things go in a very different direction than I had imagined, and that's totally cool because that's how improvisation works. Just a really cool guy, and I can't thank him enough for being on the show. So hang in here. We'll have the Scott Sherrard interview. It'll all be on the playlist, and then a collection of my favorite Scott Sherrard stuff, his solo career, and Little Feat, and Greg Allman. He was the musical director for Greg Allman. He's the lead guitarist and lead vocalist with Little Feat. That's pretty impressive right there, and especially since that was his two favorite bands growing up. That's pretty cool. Second set, before we get to Scott Sherrard, the second set, we're going to start off with some video from the Telluride Bluegrass Festival from June of 2025 with a band called the Toy Factory Project that's touring right now and sounds really great. The Toy Factory was the original name of the Marshall Tucker Band, and after Toy Caldwell, their lead guitarist and primary singer and songwriter. And so the drummer, Paul Riddle, put together like a Dead and Company type of band that's really cool. And you'll get to hear and see this in a second. But we're going to play the track Take the Highway. Paul Riddle on the drums, Marcus King on the guitar and the vocals, Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke on the guitar and the vocals, Oteil Burbridge from Dead and Company, the Allman Brothers, the Aquarium Rescue Unit, etc., etc. On the bass, Josh Schilling, who I did not know before hearing this, on the keyboards and the vocals. What a great keyboard player. And Billy Contreras on the violin. That means his name is William Contreras, and he's not the catcher with the Milwaukee Brewers. Anyway, that runs down that one. After that, we're going to hear and see the Pointer Sisters from the Soundstage TV show. I'm taking advantage of the fact that these aren't all on LP, although the Telluride Festival performance is available for download. But we're going to run a video from that, so you got that. But the Pointer Sisters from the Soundstage TV show, it was a PBS show based in Chicago on WTTW in Chicago from 1974. It's the Pointer Sisters, June, Bonnie, Ruth, and Anita. There's 4 of them in the 70s. There were only 3 of them in the 80s. One of them decided they didn't want to do that. I believe it was Bonnie. And then they had great success in the 1980s. Here they were a completely different kind of thing. They're doing an Alan Toussaint song called Yes We Can, which I think all positivity right now is a good thing. They were based out of Oakland, and they have a great drummer from Oakland playing with them. This is a great feature for the great Gaylord Birch. In Oakland in the 1970s, there was an Oakland School of Drumming. Mike Clark, who played with Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, David Garibaldi from Tower of Power, and Gaylord Birch, who plays on this, being the 3 most famous people that came out of that group. Yeah, I don't write everything down. But anyway, Gaylord Birch here in a tux, playing a Black Nitron Gretsch drum set, killing it. And then he does this little hip-hop thing. He's a little beatbox thing in 1974. Pretty cool. We're going to close out with something more from Soul Live from their album called Flowers, a second track that's just been out for a little while. We'll play a track called Flowers at Your Feet. Alan Evans on the drums, Neil Evans on the keyboards, Eric Krasno on the guitar, and special guest Van Hunt, who we play an awful lot of on the show on vocals. Really cool track. Hope you'll enjoy those. And then after that, we have the interview with Scott Sherrard. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're digging the Burnt Toast Show. Like and comment, subscribe. Like and comment and subscribe. I'm working on more interviews, and I want to thank everybody for their support. And if you'd like to support the show, there's a link in the description. This is the Burnt Toast Show. I'm Todd Harrell. The next set, Toy Factory Project, the Pointer Sisters, and Soul Live. Hope you're digging it. See you soon.
Burnt Toast!